Hi guys, random live stream. This is for those of you who are coming from the Be the Change page. This is going to be a continuation of a discussion that Bucky, Eric, and I were having on the Liberty Revolt live stream from tonight. It's an idea that Eric presented to us on a way to address congressional pay and what we can do to actually provide a solution for correctional congressional pay. I am personally a humongous um, solutions oriented person. So when Eric suggested this on our live stream, um, I wanted to continue the conversation. Unfortunately, someone who decided to leave early from the other live stream completely ended the entire broadcast. So Eric and I are going to continue this very spur of the moment conversation on what we can actually do to address congressional pay in a way that brings power back to us. Eric's idea is amazing, and he is going to explain it now. Howdy, Eric.
Yo. So yeah, I think we were kind of getting into an incredible conversation where we were.
Let's just start it over.
I'll give kind of some pretext. So we were beginning to have a conversation that centered around essentially how do we get control over our representatives? How do we involve ourselves and incentivize them to do our bidding rather than whoever's special interest group or whatever tax haven that people are looking at.
We all know politicians are incredibly corrupt, and there's a reason that they're incredibly corrupt. And a lot of our focus is on the national level nowadays. What can we do to bring that focus back to our districts, our local city level, our local state district level politics, and get more people involved, and also at the same time significantly attack this one of the biggest problems, which is the fact that Congress gets to decide their own pay. Congress gets to create their own incentives. What can we do so that they do not get raises for ruining our districts?
So yeah, I think there are really limited solutions in this instance. We have kicked the can down the road in our personal civic duties, and this is kind of what I was getting at when I spoke to specifically how would we institute something like this. Now, the overarching idea, and thank you everybody who's joining right now. If you don't have it, if you're not caught up on the conversation, throw it in the chat and we'll kind of synopsis for you. But in essence, we want the political class to go away. We want the working man, the average Joe, to be part of the political system again. And we've gotten so far away from that. There are really only a few ways to institute policies that will bring us back to reality. I'll use that word. Okay. And the idea that I floated in the Liberty Revolt stream specifically was, what if we forced our representatives to live at the standard value of living in their district, right? And in doing so, if they do a good job and they're able to raise the overall living situation, for the mass group, I think then we have a conversation that isn't centered around, and we were kind of getting into this a little bit too, Kevin, is the unionization of our Congress, where they are voting for themselves to get pay raises, and no American gets really any specific say in this, right? It's a process that we've diverted our civic duty to them.
They've basically removed their responsibility to their district on a specifically district level and moved it up to the national level, to the point where that's the only thing that matters for them anymore. And so one of the biggest problems that we see throughout Congress is the fact that people just don't pay enough attention to their specifically their Congress people, because there's really not much that their districts are reflective of their Congress people. And it really would apply more to your state level representatives than your national level, but it addresses a couple key problems. First and foremost, some people say that all we have to do is reduce their pay and it'll disincentivize people from joining. You don't just want to disincentivize bad people from joining. You want to incentivize members of that community to join. If their pay is directly reflected of them improving the lives of their community, more people will be willing to do that, especially if you get rewarded for it. You get rewarded for building up your community. If your community's median income is 42K, you as their representative would get paid 42K. But you know what? It would either that 42K would increase as your policies that you put forth improve their lives, or that 42K would become better. It would reflect a better standard of living as prices drop on stuff. Because being 42K doesn't necessarily mean it's poor or anything. 42K is more than you should need to be able to survive and be able to afford food and housing and a decent life. It's just that.
So I think that's a great point. Yeah, like, and that's that was Dylan hit me with the question of how would you expect somebody to be okay with a low end average income? But I think you just nailed it. If they're doing a good job by their constituents, the median average household income should pay your bills and then some. And one of the important parts to remember is that while we've got two things, we've got income disparities all over the country. Okay, East Coast, West Coast, middle of the country.
Yeah.
But I think one of the solutions could be is if you have a good representative, well, they can start looking at local taxes. They can start looking at interstate commerce. Well, maybe the best place to get potatoes is no longer from Idaho. Maybe if you live in Atlanta, the best place to get potatoes is from Ohio, right?
Yeah.
So we have to be specifically geared and oriented towards states' rights, and ultimately then we can look at the individual freedoms that we enjoy. And 42 grand, to your point, Kevin, may make a person very happy throughout their entire life as a standard median household income, if they can afford to go to the store and get a gallon of milk, fill their tank with gas, buy a home. It's the standard of living. It's not about necessarily the quantity of dollars, right?
And you used to be able to afford all of that stuff easily on 42K. Inflation is not necessarily a good thing. The fact that your dollar can buy significantly less now than it could in the 1850s is a direct reflection of bad economics. It should not be like the idea that inflation is inherently a good thing is not true, because at the end of the day, your dollar no longer goes the distance it could have. But getting back to the earlier point, because the problem, you have to actually identify what is leading to the problems within our Congress, right? And it's it's very easy for PACs to come in and start they'll bring someone with them kind of deal. I would suggest adding into it the caveat where districts get to vote on the requirements they want from their specific district representative. The senators, everything else they can't change that. But for their district representative, they can vote stuff in like, hey, you have to be born in our district to represent our district. And some can say, hey, you just have to live here for 6 months. Some would say, hey, you have to be 25. Some will say 18. Some will say 35. Let them decide what they want their representative to be. It'll be a reflection of their community. And it will also allow communities to take steps to prevent, say the Democratic Party thinks they can win a really easy election. It'll take steps force them to prevent. It will prevent them from being able to just bring someone along for the ride in a lot of cases. It makes them go find a member of their community that's actually going to be able to do the job well just with some of their policies.
So if you can pull this comment up, Tracy says, well, what if people disagree, right? And we kind of covered this a little bit back on the Liberty Revolt side, but I'll address it quickly, which is if you have to go in, let's say that we do this, right, and we're able to philosophically, nobody fundamentally disagrees about how we get to what the standard cost of having a representative in your district should cost. Now, to Tracy's comment of what if people disagree? Well, we treat this a lot like, in my opinion, a civic duty, like jury duty, right?
Kind of.
And the reason I propose that is it forces, Karen down the street and Jim, Joe, Bob that lives up here. You have to look each other in the eyes and be able to explain why your problem with an industry or your dislike of fossil fuels or your specific industry that is at risk is worth jeopardizing further. And I think to the point of resolution that this, for me at least, when I chase this idea down the rabbit hole, is it forces people to get in a room together, to decide on the compensation of the people representing them. Inherently, it is going to be a room full of disagreements, but generally speaking, people are always going to agree that a decision that motivates and opens opportunities for an area is probably the right direction to go. Now, you may have specific industries that you want to bring in. You may have specific ideas on how that should be spread about. That's not what we're dealing with there. I think if people disagree in a room like a jury and they're addressing these specific issues, you suddenly have to go to the personal level. You can no longer justify what the rest of the country's doing. It doesn't matter because this is going to affect Karen and Jim Bob down the street. And one of the examples that we were talking about is the oil and gas industry or the coal industry, right? Mm-hmm. And I think this one is, I think it's a really great example because you do typically have oil towns booming and they don't necessarily reap the rewards. All right. It's typically the industries around them.
Yeah.
And I think, so let me just articulate this thought is it's like if Karen's husband owns the tire shop where the big rigs get their tires in order to transport oil from the oil fields, whether Karen agrees with you about oil and fossil fuels, it no longer becomes that type of discussion because what you're really talking about is Jim Bob's shop down the street that puts tires on trucks. And that's Karen's husband. And that's their livelihood.
Yeah.
So for me, this takes away the overarching, the entire political system in the country. It localizes everything.
Yeah, it localizes everything. And that's really important for other factors as well, because what people fail to realize in a lot of cases is that at the local level, at the city level, Republican and Democrat doesn't exist. Good standard of living exists. People notice, because specifically, what about those that prefer free stuff? Here's the thing, though, is that preferring free stuff is usually very prevalent in communities that are doing very poor. Regardless of race, it is very prevalent in communities that are doing incredibly poor. People notice that. It doesn't matter Democrat or Republican. They're just going to know that their congressperson is currently responsible for the shithole they're living in. And they're not going to, they're going to keep voting them out.
The perfect example for this is LA County.
Yeah, it forces
LA County is the perfect example. They have such a concentration of wealth. And yet they have a whole city. I mean, there's the last estimate that I saw was something between 50 and 100,000 people basically in Skid Row.
Yeah,
okay,
homeless. Yeah,
this is like 2 square blocks of LA.
Yeah. It's all over the place now. It used to just be Skid Row. Now it's about 100,000 homeless people spread
every
throughout
freeway
all of
underpass, every dip in the road.
So I was born and raised in LA, spent my early life there. And since I left LA in 2012 to join the Army, I go back periodically, and I have been able to periodically watch as my hometowns crumble, as a place I loved and grew up in falls apart around it. And it's just a direct result of terrible policies. And at the end of the day, people notice those terrible policies, and that's going to be what is pushing them in the direction. And so they're going to say to themselves, look, I know he's a Democrat and everything, but he sucks. Like, this is a shithole. Like, I don't care. It creates such a disconnect between national and local level that even though they'll support national level policies that would be on the Democratic side, they're not going to be supporting the politician that's actually pushing the welfare. Whether they realize the connect between their two or not, the politician is going to realize the only way I can stay in this job and that I can continue to contribute is to end the policies that are ruining it.
So one of the important things to recognize, and this comment is great, is what about people who want the coattails? And you kind of addressed that, Kevin, but let me dive deeper and say people who want to ride the coattails are going to get left behind in this specific situation. Not in the way that you think, though. They're going to get left behind in the industry. They may want all the free stuff under the world, but if they have to go in and explain to a constituent of theirs, right? I'll use LA as the example because I think it is the most income disparity, one of the most highest income disparity places in the world. You have people who literally don't live on anything but whatever somebody walks by on the curb and throws them that day. Yep. And then you have people who are living in high-rise towers and penthouses. Okay. And that's like, if you go to Skid Row, you would recognize that most of the penthouses that are in downtown are the ones that are being surrounded by the homeless people.
Yeah.
Well, if suddenly the person has to come down off the 30th floor and has to talk to the guy who's been living in a tent, Well, the guy who's living in the tent's going to be able to articulate, this is what I need to get by. This is how I need to get by. This is what I have to do in order to earn an income. And there are no opportunities for me here. And the guy who owns a media company or something in LA who does very little actual business there is going to come and have to explain why their tax dollars aren't working hard to improve the state. It is important. It's important to remember that everything spawns on some level from local politics. And the reason we're so jumbled right now as a country is because nobody cares about local politics right now. Everybody's worried about the
corporate media.
level.
You know who's worried about local politics is the Democratic Party. They don't think that it's unintentional that they do the hand waving motion. Hey, everyone, focus on national level. AOC, look at what AOC is doing. Look at Marjorie Taylor Greene. Talk. Meanwhile, with this hand, they're sliding a bunch of operatives into your mayoral candidate, into your city councils, into your mayoral races, your school boards, everything. It is a very intentional, get everyone looking at the national as we slide everything at the local. But by forcing people to directly focus on the local in order to impact the national, it takes that power away from their media complex like that. Also allowing districts to circumvent what is laid out in the Constitution as the requirements to be specifically a representative and allowing them to dictate that themselves would do a lot to make it so that, hey, you know what? I don't really want to care, but I'm going to make it so that they can't do that deal where they start sliding their operatives in, because we're going to make it so that you have to have lived here for at least 10 years. We're going to make it so that you have to be at least 35. We're going to make it so that you must live within the district at a house of the people's choosing, kind of deal. And so give them the control that way.
So Sherry Lynn, I'll just kind of, I'm going to pick your comment. I just left California last month.
Yeah.
And I grew up in California, as did Kevin. We remember when California was still the golden state.
Absolutely incredible.
And to be honest with you, I hope that people at some level, whether, I know the recall didn't go through and I know there's tremendous disappointment, but what it did is it woke up the industry individuals. There are businesses who are never coming back to California. And right now, California cannot afford to lose businesses.
I wouldn't say never, because there was a reason why every business flocked there in the first place.
You're correct. Never is a bold statement.
But
if
which
they
means
are
it's
able
salvageable.
to gain control of the legislature, they may see incentive to have businesses back.
California is salvageable, but the longer they wait, the more brutal the machete is going to be taken to that government when it finally gets salvaged. So what's going to have to happen is California is going to have to get its fucking head back on its shoulders, pull its thumb out of its ass, and absolutely eviscerate that government. They're going to have to, they have trillions in unfunded liabilities that they're going to have to cut immediately. They're going to have to get rid of these homeless plans that they have to bring businesses back. They're going to have to get rid of these bullshit taxes that they have on everything. They're going to have to get rid of SECA, because SECA is one of the worst things in the world. They are going to have to absolutely eviscerate that government in order to save it. And then companies are going to flock back because it's fucking California. It has the best weather in the world, has the best food, it has the best scenery in the world, and it's an amazing place to live. It's just this is how bad it's gotten that people are actually being driven out of fucking California. If you think LA is nice, San Diego's even better.
It's incredible to me as we've, I'll kind of come full circle on this on this topic.
We're going to wrap up pretty soon too.
Is as we're talking about California, and I'm seeing some of these comments, go other places I left, what about Social Security? Well, these things are not solvable, to be quite frank, on a national level. To solve for Social Security. The reason it hasn't been done is because it frankly, it can't be done. Social Security is an important part of our backbone in society right now. But ultimately it's kind of what it's insolvent. It's kind of killing us slowly. And I think that one of the advantages to the idea that Kevin and I have kind of bounced around with localizing politics is, imagine if you lived in a district where $42,000 made you rich.
Yeah.
Suddenly,
made you
social, yeah,
comfortably middle class, comfortably middle
suddenly
class.
we can rebalance Social Security
Yeah.
potentially, right? And I'm
Yes.
not saying
And
that we,
more
it
young
needs to be.
people will be wanting to have kids because they don't need to make so much money in order to have, because economic success, wages play a huge role in birth rates. And what's causing a lot of the problems with Social Security has been the slowdown of the birth rates. And what's causing the slowdown of the birth rates is economic uncertainty
Disadvantage,
for
yeah.
young people, for people in their 20s and 30s that are supposed to be starting families, right? There's a reason why it's no longer abnormal for me to be single at 28. That used to be a sign of like, what the hell's wrong with you kind of deal. Like, but
So
that's
yeah,
not against the norm anymore.
I think people have tremendous misunderstandings of our social welfare systems. We cut checks before anybody else has. Like, Social Security is a slush fund at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We will be everybody who is paying
It
into
needs to
it
be
currently in the
privatized.
workforce will be likely not able to withdraw money. It's growing at such a slow pace, and
They need to
Kevin's
privatize it
point,
immediately. If they privatize it immediately, it could actually potentially maintain solvency.
I
Especially if they
actually would
get
agree with
a
that.
really aggressive. I've seen the numbers. If they can get if they can privatize immediately, allow people to dictate which, either allow the government to choose for them which private firm it goes to, or they choose it themselves. They'll have both options. But you privatize it, and you do aggressive, and you do a standard IRA kind of deal. You can make Social Security solvent again. It's just
If they
that
would
would
allow people to
remove,
take,
because you
yeah,
bring up a great point, it would remove the congressional power to reach into the giant puddle of Social Security money and use it for other shit. Right. So that's
so
currently
I'm
what
going to
happens.
articulate one more time this thought, because I really do think that it's not a full solution, and there's definitely some tricky situations that would have to be addressed individually. But I do think if we started forcing our congressional representatives to live off of the income of the median household, that soon what you would see is they're either going to uplift or they're going to get out. And that means that somebody else who cares a little more, or is more akin to, and it comes down to this nostalgia. And I'll use that word probably 100 times over again. But, I've said something pretty consistently on almost every show that I get on, which is it starts at home, and then it moves to your neighbor, and then it moves to the city, the state, and ultimately to the federal government. The beauty of performance-based pay for a congressional representative is that if they don't perform, you get to fire them. They will not make enough money in order for them to be effective changers.
As you said.
Well, so let me just kind of say this, is that to the end of some of these programs that we're talking about that are social welfare programs, if you live in Ohio, you should not pay for somebody who lives in New York. That doesn't make sense. We have a system that is built on the lowest earners' back at this point, because we refuse to take personal local responsibility. If you want to live in a place that's beautiful, that has low taxes, that allows you freedom, you have to go bug the hell out of your local
to make it
legislature.
happen. And you can make it happen, but you have to make it happen. I want to point out that, like, it's really important to understand that, like, the median income can shift not at all. And based on their performance, they will either, like you said, want to leave or not. Because if 42K all of a sudden doesn't, because also people would have to actually vote yes for him to get, for his income to keep up with the median income.
He would have to petition the constituents.
Yes. So either way,
you go to your boss for a raise. That's what it is.
Yeah. Either way, the people would have a say in it, because if he's putting in those social welfare Democrat policies and the rent control and all that other stuff, he's allowing it to happen. The people aren't going to like that. They're going to hate it. They're not going to vote him to get a raise. So all of a sudden he's going to price himself out of it, thereby making it no longer worthy of his time. And that is how, like you said, the bad ones will get pushed out, because their policies will not be reflected, directly reflect and affect their own desire to be there. So I think that we are definitely going to be continuing this in the future. This is a wonderful idea.
are we going to pair up and try and publish an article on this one? I think this
Yes,
is
we
worth
are.
going into. So,
But I
I'll
want a
just
lot
kinda,
of discussion on it and stuff like that. 'Cause,
yeah.
like I'm
So
an
I'll just
actual.
say
If
this.
I ever go into politics, I want to be with solutions in hand, man. Like
Well, I'll
that's
just say this: we're running about 25 minutes now, so we'll
yeah,
probably cut it out here, guys. But we just kind of wanted to continue the conversation where we're at. I think it's an important conversation. This is not an easy change. This is a total overhaul of the system as we see it today.
we need
But
to
it is
figure out
a
how to market it.
proposal that forces. Yeah, it's a proposal that forces local politics to again
Yes,
become important. And so
yes,
I'll reiterate something that's very important to me: civic duty. Go do your civic duty. Go do jury duty. Go
yeah,
participate in city councils.
yes,
Go
yes,
show up at fundraisers and say stuff.
yeah,
And I'll just kind of end it there because I think to that point, it's a much bigger
yeah,
conversation than just one solution.
yes. It absolutely is. And guys, I'm also going to take this opportunity to announce that this week I will be having my first ever episode of Common Nonsense. The day is still be to determined. But I will be featuring one of my best friends on it. It is going to be it's going to be a long form conversation kind of show, similar to Lex Friedman, Joe Rogan style. But like I say, I look more like a guinea pig than I do a gorilla because I'm Italian. So yeah, no, it's going to be a great show. We're just going to do long conversations where we talk about literally everything. And I want to give you guys more content, more stuff to watch. And we're going to try to make it as interesting as possible. And I really think that you guys are going to enjoy it. You're going to get to hear more of me than you would ever want to hear. And it's just
Common Nonsense with Kevin.
Yeah. Common Nonsense with Kevin.
Be on the lookout for notification. Yeah. We'll send something out. We're not sure on the day yet, but be looking for it. It will come soon, and we'll make sure that you guys all get a notification reminder on that.
Yep.
Thank you guys for joining us tonight for a short conversation.
It's been a pleasure, everyone. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your night.